and then we can start. So for those of you that don't know anything about me, my name's Sophie. I'm a member of the Time to Think faculty. Time to Think is Nancy Kline's business model, and it's all about this beautiful work called the thinking environment, which is how and what do we need to think really well for ourselves so we're able to flourish. And so I'm a member of the faculty of that group, which means I can qualify and teach other people in this approach. So I live and work in the beautiful Peak District, which for those of you not in the UK is a national park, sort of smack bang in the middle of England. And it's beautiful today. It's often rainy, but today is beautiful. But I've worked for myself now for the past 10 years. But before that, I've always worked in sort of leadership roles in lots of different spaces. So my role previous to doing this work was in global strategy for a large multinational out in Australia, which is where I lived for 10 years. And then in my very dark, distant past, I was an officer in the Royal Navy, which is a whole another story. But teaching the thinking environment is what I've done now for 10 years. And I'm really passionate about how amazing and simple it is, and yet how rare it is that we get a lot of these, conditions I think we need in order to flourish. So today, these are the things we're going to be covering. So giving and receiving appreciation with more confidence. If you struggle to find the words that you want to use when you're appreciating people, this will also be hopefully covered in some way. If you want to deepen your understanding about appreciation and why it matters, I'll be going into that. And or if you're just curious about the thinking environment and you've heard about it, or you might have read one of Nancy's books, and you just want to see some of that brought to life. So they're going to be the things that I sort of cover. So, like, why does appreciation matter? What is it and why does it matter? In the world of work I do, like the quality of everything we do, so the quality of the lives we're leading, the quality of our relationships, the quality of our health, the quality of our decisions, all of that depends on the quality of the thinking that we do. And the quality of our thinking depends on how we're being treated. So it depends not only on our internal state, but also on the conditions that we have when we're trying to think. So when we're in relationship to other people. And what we found is there are these 10 conditions or 10 behaviours that have a really positive impact on our ability to think well and be ourselves. And these have become known as the 10 components. We'd quite like there to be an 11th, so it doesn't sound like the 10 commandments, but at the moment there's 10. And each of these components individually is really, really powerful, which you'll see from appreciation. But it's when they kind of work into relationship with each other that they can be really transformative in their lives. And so today I just want to talk you through appreciation. So it helps us to think well, and we're able to think more critically about problems or challenges when we're immersed in a culture that is more constructive. And the way we define appreciation is really simple. It's not easy, but it is really simple. It is noticing what is good and saying it. So can we notice what is good in the people and things around us? And can we take the time to say it? And we flourish in the presence of appreciation. And yet often in life and through our school system, and depending on the organisations you've worked in, we get rewarded for being critical. So for finding the gaps, for challenging, for solving the problems. So for always kind of like critically scrutinizing. So that's what's kind of seen as good skills. And so often appreciation can be seen as almost like a soft skill. It's something that's a bit wishy-washy. It doesn't really impact on things. And because of that, often when we're in discussion with people, we often and sometimes always only focus on what's not working. So we focus on the problems, we focus on what's broken. And yet, ironically, we're much more able to think about the problems and the challenges if that's done within the context of what is going well and what we value in each other. And also because we know we're able to think better when we're immersed in an appreciative environment, actually our thinking, our ability to think is compromised. And so when we're always in this kind of critical problem solving state, we're not actually opening up to see all of the possibilities. So we can get quite tunnel visioned when we're not in this. So praise, appreciation, respect, all of these things help us feel good. And when we feel good, we think better. And when we think better, we're able to solve all the challenging things as well. And you'll see bandied about, especially in the thinking environment world, this ratio of like 5-to-1. So we need a ratio of approximately 5 positive or constructive interactions to 1 negative or critical comment. And that is because we have what's called a negativity bias. So we tend to fixate on the criticism or the challenge more than we allow the positive things to land. And there's lots of reasons for this, but partly it's because we have a really strong sense of and need for belonging and connection. And so when we perceive a threat or perceive a challenge, we react much more strongly to that. Whereas sometimes when we are given or we hear appreciative things, we can often sort of dismiss them straight away, or we don't allow them to land. And I'll talk about that later. The other really important thing about appreciation is it helps us to create the conditions for safety and trust to be present in groups. So there's this term that's used called psychological safety, which it's quite a big thing in organisations. And the term was created by a lady called Amy Edmondson, who's done a lot of work in this area. But psychological safety really is about being safe enough and trusting that you can say what you think without risk of belittlement or without risk of being put down. Criticism and not recognising the value that each person brings to an interaction. These things decrease psychological safety. Whereas appreciation is one of those things, it's almost like a foundation stone. When you have a really high appreciative culture, we tend to make more positive assumptions. So we tend to, we're able to criticize, we're able to have constructive dialogue and discussion with each other because we've got this sort of bedrock of appreciation. So we know we value each other, we know that we're valued for who we are. And so we're then able to challenge and critique each other much more constructively. So yeah, there's lots of reasons why, but I think even if you just go back to it feels good, like that in and of itself is, and we'll all know that, like you'll have had a sense of when you were appreciated, and just how delightful that feels, and how it really kind of lifts your mood and lifts your sort of sense of possibility. So before I get into the how and the what's, I just wanted to go through a couple of definitions, because we often use the words, recognition and appreciation and gratitude interchangeably, and yet they're subtly different. And I think they are all connected, and I think they're all interrelated. But I do just want to sort of differentiate what those differences are. So recognition is about giving positive feedback, generally based on a task. So recognition is often performance related. It will often be looking back on something that has been done, in which case it's kind of conditional, and it's finite. So it's about a particular task or something that's happened, and it's generally looking backwards. So it's finite, it's conditional, it's task based. Appreciation, on the other hand, is an acknowledgement of a person's inherent value, regardless of what they do. So it's an appreciation of who they are rather than what they're doing. So it's seeing and saying what we value in them as a person, so as a human being, as a colleague, as a friend, as a partner. And because of that, it's much more expansive. It's much more unconditional, and it's much more personal. So it's much more about who we are. So recognition is about what people do. Appreciation is about who they are. And then gratitude, lovely, lovely gratitude. Gratitude is the inner feeling of being thankful. So gratitude is an internal feeling. And the wonderful thing about gratitude is it grounds us in the present moment. So you can't be feeling gratitude and doing much else. So it really grounds you into what is, which is why you'll often see like people will recommend practices of gratitude. And I'll talk you through a couple of them. And my feeling is it's very, very hard for us to notice and see and say what we appreciate in other people if we don't have some kind of gratitude practice. Because what that does is almost allow us to constantly be tapping into and noticing in our own lives what we feel thankful for. And so then when we're with other people, we're much more able to give them it. So they're all slightly different, but they are interrelated. I'm just going to pause there. That's a lot of talking, isn't it? Although I said I wasn't going to go to chat, I just wondered if anyone wanted to just unmute themselves and ask anything before I keep going. So everyone. Okay,
Sophie, it's Laurie here. Can you just repeat what you said for gratitude, just to make sure?
Gratitude. Yeah, so gratitude is the inner feeling. So it's a feeling state of being thankful.
Okay.
Which is why I think a lot of gratitude practices don't work, because they get you to think about what you're grateful for, but actually we want to think about them in order to elicit the feeling. So we want the feeling of gratitude. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
I'm just have a signal board.
Sophie, I have a question too. It's Andrew here.
Hi.
I recognise what you say about how hard it is to give appreciation if one doesn't practice gratitude. I wonder if the same is true about receiving appreciation. I know some people find appreciation very hard to receive. And I suspect there's a similar dynamic there, that again, there are people who actually don't practice much gratitude. I'm basing this on a very small sample size, so it might be skewed.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Andrew. I talk about it later. I might as well talk about it now. I think when we struggle to receive appreciation, it can often be because our own ratio of appreciation to criticism is nowhere close to 5-1. And so if we are sort of quite critical of ourselves, if we have quite a vocal inner critic, and so we're constantly berating ourselves for what we're not doing brilliantly, and we struggle with perfectionism, and we think we're not good at stuff, when somebody else then gives us an appreciation, it almost feels insincere, because we don't have almost the soil in which that seed of appreciation can take root. So yeah, that's my I think it's when we struggle with that own ratio for ourselves. Yeah. So how to give appreciation, and I think that there is an art to giving appreciation, and there is also an art to receiving it. And what I also think is really important with this is, in some ways, it's the most simple thing in the world to do. Like, you don't really need to read books. You don't even need to really come on this workshop. We just need to be present enough to notice it. And there are ways that we can give and receive appreciation that mean it will land more effectively. And so I'll just share with you some of the things I found beneficial. So in the thinking environment, we talk about these 3 S's. So in order for appreciation to land, it needs to be sincere. So only saying what we really mean. And most people have got a really highly attuned radar for insincerity. And there's nothing worse than saying something you don't mean, because it will almost backfire. It's worse than not saying anything at all. So if you're just going through the motions, or you're not sincere, it's better not to try and appreciate. But the other thing I say with this is people worry about, well, will it sound sincere? Like, will it have the right words? And my thing here is, if you are sincere, you don't need to worry about being sincere. So if it is coming from a place of generosity and open-heartedness and kindness, and you're doing the best you can, it will come across as sincere. And the research on this is really clear that people, when you're asked, like, do you think you can give appreciation well, people are quite critical. They'll think they don't have the right words, or they will say something wrong. And when you ask the recipients, they don't care about that at all. They just care that it was sincere and heartfelt. And so it's just not worrying too much. If it is sincere, it will sound sincere. So that's the first S. The second is specific. So trying to be as specific as you can about what you appreciate. And almost paradoxically, what that allows for is, the more specific we are able to be in our appreciation, the more generally somebody can apply that to their life or their work. And then the last one is succinct. So partly because of the negativity bias, but partly if people go on and on and on about how brilliant we are, we tend to stop listening. So we don't seem able to hear too much of the good stuff. So less really is more, just short sentences. This is what I appreciate. And the way I kind of frame up my appreciations, or at least in my head, is I use this acronym called TAG. And the first is, the T just stands for thanks. So just saying thank you for something. So it might be, thank you, that was a brilliant presentation. Stop. The A is then, so what do I appreciate? And this is the bit I think sometimes we struggle with. So we can say, well, that was a great presentation. And then it's like, so what is it that shows me about that person? And so the A there is it, I really appreciate your thoughtfulness in how you put that together. Or I really appreciate how you were able to bring such complexity and make it really simple. Or I appreciate how generous you were. So what is it that the thing they did demonstrates about who they are? So we want to appreciate that. And then the G is gratitude. So finishing with an expression of gratitude. And I tend to do that as I feel. So thank you so much. I feel far clearer in my understanding, or I feel really seen, or I feel really valued. So the tag is the thanking, then appreciating somebody, and then finishing with a gratitude. And there's nothing wrong with taking the time you need to be able to appreciate sincerely. So sometimes you might feel like you're just on the spot and you've got to come up with something. And I would always say there, like, you can just say thank you at that moment. So you can just say thank you, I really enjoyed X, and then you can go away and do some thinking about, actually, what is it I really want to appreciate in that person? And you can follow up with a note or an email or a text or a card. So it doesn't all have to be instantaneous and urgent. Like, if you can't think of something that's sincere in that moment, you can just take your time and then follow up. And the other thing with appreciation is, people tend to think of it as only being words. So words of appreciation. And we tend to appreciate the way we like to be appreciated. So if you like somebody saying, saying something about you, like, that's how you'll generally appreciate. But different people like to be appreciated in different ways and at different times and in different contexts. And so it's just kind of, I think, broadening out our understanding of, like, what does appreciation look like? And for some people it's words, but for other people it's you taking the time to follow up with them, or send them a text or a card or a note. Appreciating somebody is calling them. Appreciating someone is your time. Appreciating somebody is remembering it's their birthday and sending them something, or just touching base. So there's loads of different ways that we can appreciate. And it's one, finding something that feels authentic to you, but also then not assuming that what feels authentic to you is what everybody else wants, because it sometimes won't land. And I think that's partly it. Sometimes you're given appreciation that is really sincere and succinct and specific, and it still doesn't land. And you're like, oh, And it might just be that actually in that moment, the person wasn't receptive, or they weren't at ease, or they didn't feel comfortable. But it doesn't mean you did something wrong. It just meant for some reason it didn't land. Yeah, I think we've got time. I think any questions or any thoughts on that before I?
I think that's something I find, particularly at work, is when somebody does something, I try to take the time to, I mean, as you went through the acronym, the TAG acronym, I think, oh, that's how I actually think about what I've got to say to someone, or how do I make it sincere? And yet sometimes I'm surprised by the fact that it doesn't seem to land. And then I think, so was I actually given that appreciation for myself rather than for them? But you just explaining that, Sophie, makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I've no idea what moment they're in. So like you say, it could be that it's just not the right time for them to get that appreciation. Yeah.
So I'll keep going, and I'll talk about like how to receive appreciation. And like for me, I think this is one of the real challenges, is why we don't give it, because I think often we're so bad at receiving it, and we've had a lifetime of people not receiving appreciations well, and so we therefore make assumptions that it's either not needed or not wanted or not welcome. But again, I've tried to make this into an acronym so it's easy for you to remember, but the acronym is not important. It's the kind of the meaning behind it. But when somebody is appreciating you, I think the first thing we need to do is to stop. So we almost need to acknowledge this is a moment of appreciation, and make contact, make yourself available to receiving that appreciation, and let their words sink in. So just stopping and taking the time and acknowledging it, and hear what they're saying. So often people will be appreciating, and almost before someone's finished their sentence, you'll be rushing to dismiss it or discount it, or be like, oh no, it's nothing. So just actually allowing them without interruption to appreciate you fully, and just take the time to do that. And the T stands for true. So accepting that if they have seen something in you that they value, that there is probably an element of truth in it. So you might not quite see, where that came from, but just accepting that there is probably something true in there. So there is a gift to be received. And so staying connected to that truth. And then the A is for accept. So accept the appreciation gracefully. So all we have to do is smile and say thank you. And we don't at that point, once we've said thank you, then go, oh, and it was nothing. Really not a bother at all. There was, we don't need to then provide the commentary, or we just say thank you. And if we're not very good at remembering appreciation, or they almost like just almost disappear before they've landed, taking the time to write down what somebody else said, or to capture it. And I think of like little appreciations as almost like little tiny seeds, and if they're thrown out, and we don't take the time to almost protect them and just nurture them a little bit, they just can sometimes almost disappear in the wind, and so I just think taking that time to accept them, acknowledge them, and capture them so we can nurture them. And then a little bit to Andrew's point here, the R stands for ratio, and this for me is, if you find it really hard to receive appreciation, the first thing I would be encouraging you to do is to almost just monitor where your own ratio of appreciation is for yourself. So how often are you taking the time to really stop and take note and acknowledge all of the things that you are doing really well? And I guarantee you will be doing way more than 5 to 1 well. Like we are all doing so many things, and yet they just get taken for granted. They become invisible. And so just taking that time to look at where's that ratio in and for ourselves. because we can only give what we have, for ourselves. And I think we can't, if we're always reliant on somebody else or other people for that ratio of 5-1 appreciation to criticism, it's going to be really challenging. And so I think partly, practicing gratitude, but partly practicing appreciation for ourselves makes it much more likely that we're able to receive the appreciation when we are given it. Yeah. And then I thought I'd do a section on why don't we appreciate? Because I think everyone, especially everyone on this call, we know it's valued and we know it's valuable. And something I read the other day really resonated, because I think it was a quote, but it said, the most important thing is to remember the most important thing. And that goes to my first point in this. I think what most stops us appreciating, so stopping and noticing and saying what we appreciate in others, is time. Is people are so busy, we're overwhelmed, we don't stop for long enough to actually recognize what we already have and recognize the amazing people and things that are around us. So we don't stop for long enough. And for me, that's a constant practice of prioritizing what's most important. Because my default, and you'll all have a slightly different one, my default when I get busy is I default to task. So I just get stuff done. And I forget that actually most of the time people don't care about the stuff I'm doing. They care about how I'm making them feel. And they would much prefer me to do a lot less and appreciate them a lot more. And so for me, remembering is that what's most important. Right now, what is most important? And I had a really interesting, when we had the second lockdown, so when we had that latest round of lockdown in the UK, and so we got told on the Sunday that the kids weren't going back to school, and it was all just a bit of a kerfuffle. And I spent about 2 weeks being quite resentful and quite angry, which aren't emotions that sit particularly comfortably with me. And then what I realized one day was, when I was so caught up in my anger and my resentment, what that had blinded me to was how much I had to be grateful for and how much I had that I already appreciated. And almost once I could see that, all the anger and the resentment just disappeared, because it was of course. But I had to stop myself and bring myself back to noticing that I was in this kind of cycle of resentment. So I think time is the first one. The second piece is around we fear not doing it right. So we think we're going to say the wrong thing, or we think we're not going to have the right words. And this came through loud and clear in the feedback before the courses. People worry that they don't have a language of appreciation. And so part of the resources I'm going to give you after the call is almost like a database of loads of qualities that you can just start building up a vocabulary of appreciation. And if I could just leave you with anything that all of the things I've read is, there is no way you can do it wrong. It's more important to do it sincerely and just say thank you and start, because people don't worry. We worry about doing it wrong. People who are on the receiving end don't value that at all. They just value that you tried and you care. I think we make assumptions. So we make assumptions that it won't be received well, or assume people will think we want something, or there's an ulterior motive. People assume that somebody else will do it. So especially in organizations, people assume people upwards get appreciated by somebody else, and often they don't. So people assume everyone is being appreciated, and they're not. And then this came through really loudly as well, which was, how do we appreciate people we don't like? What about those people that we don't like their values, or we've got very different values and we don't like what they're doing? How do I appreciate them sincerely? And I'm not in any way saying it's easy, but I also think we're just probably not looking hard enough at those circumstances or those people. And there's an organisation called Arbinger, and they talk about people that we find more challenging. What we tend to do is we horribilize them. So we tend to only ever see their the bad things, you know, so they do something and we don't like it, and then that reinforces that we don't like what they do. And yet actually those people that we find really challenging, other people will love and like, and they've probably got entire communities of people around them that really value them. And so I think sometimes with the people we find it harder, we just need to broaden out our story. We need to open up to the possibility of them as a human being, and not just as the little bit that we get to see. But don't get me wrong, like it's not easy, but I think it is possible. And the other thing I won't touch on here, because I'll talk about it in the component of difference, is often where people are really different to us, we find them most challenging, but there can be a degree of bias. So we tend to like what is more similar to us. So we like people that look like us and sound like us. We prefer to see what is immediate and respond to that rather than delve more deeply. We will often take our perception to be objective reality when actually there's a lot more to it. And so I think sometimes we just have to open up to the possibility that there's more that could be appreciated than we're currently seeing. The language piece I've mentioned, we worry about the words. And then, and this came up earlier, is that not feeling it ourselves. So it can be really hard to appreciate others when we don't have a kind of a bedrock of appreciation and gratitude in our own lives. Because it's almost like in that moment, you're having to dredge something up that isn't already there. Whereas if you have a practice of gratitude or appreciation, it's far easier because you'll be constantly looking for and noticing what is already good in your own life. And so you'll naturally then expand that outwards. So I've shared quite a lot. And so I wanted to just give you a few possible options that you could try after this call. I'm not suggesting you do all of them. You might not do any of them. You can come up with your own list, but these are a few nice places to start. The first one is to listen to somebody as an act of appreciation. So giving somebody your full, undivided, uninterrupted attention is an act of appreciation. So you can listen fully to somebody. You could do what I call a 3 for 7. This is very well researched, very well proven to make a big impact, so it's worth doing. But every night or every morning, depending on your schedule, set a timer for 5 or 10 minutes and write down 3 things that went well in your day. But importantly, you want to write down why they went well. So what went well and why they went well. If you struggle with a ratio of 5 to 1 appreciation for yourself, I would encourage you to do this for yourself. So write down 3 things that you did well and why you did them well, or what you did that went well. And if you do that for a week, it will have a knock-on effect for, I think they say, about 3 months. Even doing it once a week makes a big difference. But I would say as a practice, if you do it for a week, and then even if you did it once a week as a practice, it makes a really big difference. So what went well and why it went well. The next 2 are kind of odd, but they do work. They're really quite powerful. So the mental subtraction is think about something that you are deeply grateful for. So someone or something that you really appreciate in your life. And then think about all the ways that might not have happened. So think about the ways in which that person or that thing might not have come into your life. So it's almost like you take it away. Because again, what's been shown is we end up not seeing what is most present. So the things that we've already got that are amazing become invisible. And so doing this mental subtraction allows us to kind of focus back in on, actually, there is a lot of good that we already have. And I think the worst is similar to that. So thinking the worst is, think about something in your life that has been really challenging. Something where it was hard. You know, it might have been an experience, a heartache, a grief, a job loss. So something that has been challenging in your life. And then think about what that has allowed you to become. So what did you learn from that? How did you grow? How did you change? Because it's often from the things that challenge us the most that we cultivate compassion, and we generate wisdom, and we work out where our boundaries are, and we work out what's most important to us. And so sometimes it's just acknowledging that even these bad challenges can be really appreciative. And Corey, I loved your question on this. You know, how do we learn to appreciate not only what is positive in our life right now, but can we also learn to appreciate where we're challenged? Can we appreciate the people that challenge us, us and the circumstances? And then the writing a letter of gratitude, again, really well known, but very few people do it. But it's really effective. Thinking about somebody in your life that has had a really positive impact on you, and write them a letter and send them to it. They say the best thing you can do is read it out to them. But if that feels like a step too far, just sending it to them. And without expectation of reply, we send it with an open hand. But yeah, writing a letter to somebody. And I always just think, like, imagine how amazing that would be to receive. Like, imagine getting a letter through the post where somebody says, I met you 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and you had a really big impact on my life. And I've just reflected on that, and I wanted to let you know that. Like, that would just be amazing, wouldn't it? So I just think, again, we struggle sometimes to give these, but I just think, oh, imagine receiving that. It would just be amazing, wouldn't it? And then the one thing I would love all of you to do on this call, and it's so simple, is just to send a thank you email or text to somebody who's been good to you. So somebody you know, like, trust, somebody you work with, someone in your circle, but just somebody, and just say thank you and tell them what you appreciate in them. And can you imagine, you know, there's 85 of you on this call, there's 150 who will get the recording. Like, those little ripples going out into the world, it's like those people are then more likely to be appreciative of others. And so it's not underestimating the impact that you can have with these drips of appreciation. Like, they take root, and they really do matter. So just before we close, if you want to learn more about any of this, about me, about the thinking environment, there's a couple of ways we can sort of stay in touch. So the first of those is I've got, last year I created an online introduction to the thinking environment, and this was very much like the course I wish I'd had access to when I started. So Nancy Klein has written some amazing books, but I almost wanted something that bridged the gap between a book and the courses. And so there's an introduction, it's self-paced, it's all online. If you've done that course or any other thinking environment course, I run regular alumni events where we get back together, we think, you know, I do some teaching, but we also have an opportunity to think and meet other people. And then I'm planning to run these masterclasses every month. So next month is a subject which is close to my heart, which is about embracing ease. And for those of you that knew me 10 years ago, you would know that I wasn't at ease. And one of the real gifts of finding this work has been a really grounded sense of ease in my life and my work. And it's, yeah, a beautiful way of being. So I'll send you the link if you wanted to register for that. So I'm just going to stop the share. So we've got a few minutes just before I do a close. So any questions before I get you to anything?
Hi Sophie, it's Anne-Marie.
Hello.
I was just really interested in what you said about gratitude being the feeling of thankfulness, because I think that I do feel thankful for lots of things, but I think I maybe don't move into that actual feeling. I think it more in my head. So that was a really interesting point for me to reflect on.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's almost like writing that second part of like, I'm grateful for this. And then just thinking about like why, almost forces us into like, oh yeah. Otherwise it can just become another task. So it's like, oh yes, I've got to do my gratitude and my yoga and my thing. And it's like, oh no, it's not meant to be a thing. It's meant to be a feeling state. So, so just before we do close, I'm gonna put you back into the breakout rooms, and we're gonna do what I call a rampage of appreciation. And so you're gonna be with one other person, and you're gonna get, I'll do it for like a minute. You can have a minute each where, without filtering, you just get to share all the things that you are really appreciative for in your life. So the other person will be there to encourage and invite you to keep going. So you can break all the rules I just gave you. It doesn't need to be succinct or specific. You can just outpour with, what are you grateful for? What are you appreciative of in your life? And so the rooms will be open for about 3 minutes, but make sure you each get a turn just before we do that. Let me just open these. Just recreate. So yeah, it's a proper rampage. It's not meant to be a polite thing. It's a, let's just go for it. Let me just open